Matt, really interesting debut at bantamweight for Julija Stoliarenko, coming in off of her wild Invicta FC bantamweight title fight against Lisa Verzosa in a fight that was really reminiscent of Nicholas Dalby and Ross Houston, but they let the third round continue because if you look at that, everything was blood. It was kind of like watching The Shining. If you look at Verzosa, had two huge scars that are kind of still there today that you can find on Instagram. Not that great. But Julija Stoliarenko, that's not typically the fights that she has. She tried to do her typical thing in the first round, try and bait Verzosa down to the ground, really work an armbar. She's got a great armbar from the ground, but when she strikes, it's kind of one and done. She lands kind of some power shots. She's not a great striker, but you did see that in the fight against Verzosa that are striking 1-4. It was a split decision win. First judge had it, Verzosa, the last two for Stoliarenko. It's an interesting one because we saw her fight this past spring. We haven't really seen her fight since. She fought on the Contender Series, on the Ultimate Fighter season 28, which we haven't seen a lot of fighters stick around from that season. She picked up a win over Marcia Allen. Then she lost to Penny Kanzad. Then she lost to Leah Letson in the finale of the season. So since then, she had that Invicta win. She fought on the regional scene back in Europe, and here are the records of the fighters that she fought. There were 4 of them. 2 of them were, pro debuts. One was 4-1, and the other one was 2-3. So it was kind of like, really pick some steam back up after the Ultimate Fighter. She fights Verzosa over in Invicta. She gets a really big win. She looked powerful on the feet, but again, a lot of those ones, and she really is a submission artist on the ground, and you have to watch for that. So I set it up for the UFC newcomer in Julija Stoliarenko. What can you tell me about Yana Kunitskaya? A former Invicta bantamweight champ as well.
Exactly. And someone who really hasn't been in the UFC for a long time, but when I think about their tenure, I'm like, oh, Kunitskaya's been fighting for a very long time. But she had that crazy debut against Cyborg, which was just, why would you ever do that to anybody? Because that's just very rude. She gets stopped there. But then you finally got to see kind of what her skill set was after a few fights. The Lena Landsberg fight was interesting because Landsberg, not the most well-known woman in that division, but someone who, again, the term gatekeeper gets thrown out a lot, but she's kind of that mid-tier gatekeeper. There's gatekeepers that mean you can stay in the UFC. There's some that mean you can get in the top 15. Then there's some that mean, okay, you're elite. And I think Aspen Ladd's a pretty good measuring stick for, or not Aspen Ladd, sorry, Lena Landsberg. She's a great measuring stick for just getting into that top 15, kind of proving that you're a contender. And the Marion Renault fight was a weird one because for Kunitskaya, it was a great wrestler and someone who is really good at jiu-jitsu, so it kind of gave her a different look than her previous 2 opponents. And she had done really well, but then she gassed in that third round. And Marion Renault, just scrappy as anyone, and was able to really put it on her, broke her nose, completely dominated kind of that third round.
And people might not hold Marion Renault in the highest regard because she's not just like, starting out her 40s. She's into her 40s, and she didn't have a good fight against Raquel Pennington in her last one. But Marion Renault is a good fighter, especially for somebody in this bantamweight division. And like you said, Yana Kunitskaya was all blown up, really hurt her nose. It was a tough fight for her. She won it, but she took some time off after that.
Exactly. And I think that's the real big key to take away from this. Yana Kunitskaya does eat damage, and that's something that you have to worry about. The Aspen Ladd fight was terrible just because Aspen Ladd, who her striking's fairly rudimentary, but we all know what her ground and pound is. I mean, Aspen Ladd has some of the better ground and pound in all the UFC, regardless of weight class or gender. When she gets on top of you, she beats your head into the mat, and she screams like Serena Williams if she hits a tennis ball. It's kind of intimidating.
It's scary.
It really is. So Kunitskaya, she's one of those great cases that we don't really know where her skill set is. Because when you look at her 2 wins in the UFC, it's Lena Landsberg and Marion Renault, and the Renault fight was pretty close. And her 2 losses are Chris Cyborg, the second greatest female MMA fighter of all time, and Aspen Ladd, someone who, yes, she had that quick knockout loss to Durandamy, but other than that, we've never really seen her face adversity in the UFC. So Kunitskaya's in an odd spot because I think she herself could kind of become that new measuring stick at 135, because if you could beat a woman like Kunitskaya, somebody who has a really big judo background, which not a lot of fighters do, is good on the feet, really long, throws great kicks, and when the fight goes to the ground, I mean, she beat Tanya Evinger by armbar to win the Invicta title in the first place. I know it got overturned afterwards because Tanya Evinger kind of stepped on her head. No one knew if it was legal or not, but I digress. Kunitskaya is going to need to bring her best version into this. She trains with Thiago Santos now, which is kind of neat. Trains the UFC PI, so I'm sure she's getting great training. I think this would be an interesting fight just because The women's 135 division is so wide open. You have a champ who looks pretty much invincible. She doesn't face any adversity in her fights because she's good at everything. And you need contenders right now, or at least new contenders, because I can only watch Amanda Nunes beat up Jermaine Durandamy and Holly Holm so many times before I'm just not going to watch anymore because I know what's going to happen. And with Durandamy, her huge weakness is the wrestling. With Holly Holm, she just got KO'd with a head kick. But for a woman like Kunitskaya, if she was able to kind of climb those ranks, I think she would pose. She wouldn't beat Amanda Nunes, I'm not going to say. She would get starched. But she's at least a new and a fresh face and someone who is quite recognizable. So she can get a really impressive win here. Maybe fight a Raquel Pennington next. Maybe fight someone in that top 5 range to get her up to a title shot would be really good. But it's just, she eats a lot of damage and it's hard to tell. I think she'll be able to get the win, but I'm not overly confident in that pick.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where the odds have shifted quite a bit. So they open minus 175 Kunitskaya, plus 135 for Stoliarenko. Right now, Stoliarenko plus 190, and you've got Kunitskaya minus 235. I'm sure, again, that's name value because a lot of people might not be familiar with Julija Stoliarenko. I mean, the picture that we have next to us over there is from her time on The Ultimate Fighter. So it's kind of a weird one. You've got Lithuania. We saw Modestas Bukauskas coming in, getting a big win over Andreas Michailidis not that long ago under somewhat controversial circumstances, but still Lithuania getting a win. You've got the Lithuanian here in Stoliarenko. I think as the fight wears on, it's one of those ones that definitely does favor Stoliarenko, like you had mentioned. I mean, she fought that fight against Verzosa, getting the win there. That was a wild one. But the trouble for me is Kunitskaya on the feet, a lot more well-versed, a lot more things that you have to worry about. You get it down to the ground, and again, you look at Kunitskaya, the fight against Chris Cyborg. It was like, oh my gosh, is she the first person that's going to take Chris Cyborg down? Wow, like, this looks amazing, and then she got finished, and it was somewhat predictable. But I really do think that Kunitskaya is going to win. I think it's a good opportunity for Stoliarenko here. But again, it's one of those ones, if you look over on Tapology, and I'm sure it's the name value at a 607 votes, 73% going Kunitskaya, 89% predicting a decision win. I think that's how it's going to happen with all the tools and all the things that you can see from the tape study. What do you make of this one?
I think it would be great for the UFC if Stoliarenko was able to win, just because it's a division that needs new names, new faces, and it'd be really nice. But it's a lot to ask in your UFC debut to beat Yana Kunitskaya, a woman who, yes, she hasn't always performed to the utmost of her ability, but you realize what her skill set is. And again, I would put her in line with some of those frustrating fighters. She's really long for the division, throws a lot of push kicks, a lot of front kicks, and she's able to stay away from the majority of her opponents. But again, like we had mentioned, once the fight wears on, she gets a little lazy with those jabs in her distance, and she is able to get caught. So there's definitely a window open for Stoliarenko. I just think Kunitskaya is going to be able to get it done.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight, both going with Yana Kunitskaya to get the win. You're not going to want to miss the rest of our predictions for the card, including extended look at Derek Lewis versus Alexei Oleinik. Those are their finishing moves. You're not going to want to miss that. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it.